good evening, this is Hound Steve coming to you on the 19th of January, and now we're going to take a little look at the immigration crisis in Europe. And Emmanuel Macron now is coming out with talking about quotas for refugees coming into the country and a national referendum. And of course he's been warned that if he has a national referendum there will be possibly even a collapse in France. And Viktor Orban, Hungary's Prime Minister, is calling for a bloc of anti-immigration politicians to start taking over positions in Europe. And even Angela Merkel is offering to pay a year's living expenses for migrants who want to go back to their country of origin. And Denmark is now moving unwanted refugees out onto a deserted island. Okay, but first a big shout out to any new subscribers joining my channel, and welcome to all of my returning subscribers. It is really great to see you here. Again, we are pushing our way up to 9,500, closing in on 10,000 subscribers, and I thank you all for that. That is absolutely fantastic. Okay, so before we go too much further, let's move over to these news items that I found on the internet, and we'll have a little talk about them, and we'll come back and do a wrap-up. Okay, here we go. Sunday Express, Macron crisis, desperate leader considers migrant quota as Yellow Vest protests rage on. French President Emmanuel Macron has been branded irresponsible for suggesting the introduction of annual quotas on migration as a topic for part of the 3-month national debate aimed at mollifying Yellow Vest protesters. And I find it's interesting that, just stop here for a second, the word mollifying. This is to basically get you to go back in your corner and stop screaming. Okay, and they don't really want to solve the problem. They want you just to go away, and that's what these debates are for, is to mollify you. Okay. In a sweeping letter to the French public, Mr. Macron said he has heard the public's anger and shared its impatience for a more prosperous country and a fairer society. Then he mentioned the possibility of introducing annual immigration quotas, saying it would not apply to asylum status. He said, as regards immigration, once our asylum obligations have been met, would you like us to be able to set annual quotas defined by Parliament? Mr. Macron then referred to the tensions and doubts linked to immigration as the failings of our integration system. The young centrist stressed the need to differentiate between refugees who have fled war and persecution and economic migrants who come to France looking for a better future, a key tenet of his current migration policy. Okay, also from the Sunday Express, Macron crisis, shock referendum could plunge France into anarchy, Yellow Vest warning. France's digital minister, Munir Mahoubi, on Sunday warned that a popular referendum on any subject would lead to government collapse and political unrest if left unchecked, calling into question one of the key demands of the anti-establishment Yellow Vest movement. And here we are, the Black Wall of Death, yes. And talk about anarchy, France, police use water cannons on Yellow Vest protesters. Yep, that's going to really calm them down, isn't it? France has been gripped by social unrest ever since the protest movement triggered by rising fuel prices spiralled into a wider rebellion against the government's liberal economic policies. Mr. Mahoubi, a close ally of President Emmanuel Macron, told Europe One Radio, a universal RIC, a citizens' initiative referendum, on any topic risks to trigger widespread political instability and constitutes a great danger to our country. France's anti-government Yellow Vests are demanding the right to hold popular referendums known as RICs through mass petitions. And why shouldn't we? Why shouldn't we? This is what direct democracy is all about. Switzerland has been using this method since 1846. And we know why they don't want referendum. It's because the people would not act in favour of the government's wishes in accordance with the bankers' wishes. That's why they don't want referendum. But it's interesting that Switzerland is the centre of banking, and it's also probably one of the most peaceful and prosperous nations in Europe, and it's not a member of the EU. The Guardian, Viktor Orban calls for anti-migration politicians to take over EU. Hungarian PM also hails a new partnership forged with Poland by Italio's Matteo Salvini. Hungary's far-right Prime Minister Viktor Orban has called for anti-migration politicians to take over Europe's institutions after this spring's elections, as he hailed a new partnership between Poland's right-wing government and Italy's populist Interior Minister Matteo Salvini. This is a topic that is radically transforming European politics. It's the defining political process in Europe, Orban said at a rare press conference in Budapest on Thursday. The party structures, traditionally left or right, are being taken over by a different dimension, those for migration and against immigration. Orban said Hungary's goal was to gain an anti-immigration majority in the European Parliament, then in the Executive European Commission, and later, as national elections changed the continent's political landscape, the European Council, where national leaders make most of the important EU decisions. This is from the New York Times, and it would seem that Denmark plans to isolate unwanted migrants on a small island. They are unwanted in Denmark, and they will feel that, the country's immigration minister Inger Støjberg said about a government plan to house unwelcome foreigners on a remote island. Copenhagen. Denmark plans to house the country's most unwelcome foreigners in a most unwelcoming place, a tiny, hard-to-reach island that now holds the laboratories, stables and crematory of a centre for researching contagious animal diseases. As if to make the message clearer, one of the two ferries that serve the island is called the Virus. They are unwanted in Denmark, and they will feel that, the immigration minister Inger Støjberg wrote on Facebook. On Friday, the centre-right government and the right-wing Danish People's Party announced an agreement to house as many as 100 people on Lindholm Island. Foreigners who have been convicted of crimes but who cannot be returned to their home countries, many will be rejected asylum seekers. The 17-acre island in an inlet of the Baltic Sea lies about 2 miles from the nearest shore, and ferry service is infrequent. Foreigners will be required to report at the island centre daily and face imprisonment if they do not. And here is a great piece again by Zero Hedge. Merkel offering to pay 1 year's living expenses if refugees leave Europe. The latest in Germany is now Merkel, who offered cash to refugees to return home last November, has stepped up her game and offered to pay their living expenses for 1 year if they return home. And here is the ad right here. Billboards are appearing all over Germany making this latest offer. Believe it or not, more than 20,000 refugees vanished when they were going to be deported. This illustrates that politicians should simply not be allowed to make unilateral decisions. In this case, Merkel's decision has impacted all of Europe when the rest of Europe had no opportunity to agree or vote on the issue. Chancellor Merkel's poll rating internationally collapsed after her refusal to yield to Greece in the debt crisis. She allowed the Greek people to be stripped-mined of assets to pay for their corrupt politicians. When she was being criticised by the world press for her obstinance with regard to Greece, she did a 180-degree turn and changed the subject from Greece to Syria. It all began when on July 15, 2015, Time magazine wrote, Berlin's role as the enforcer in negotiations over Greece's debt could cause lasting damage to Germany's global image. Merkel has kept her own poll people to make sure she turns and stays with the popular swings. When her image was tanking due to her policies in Greece, this is when, without a European vote, she flipped solely for her personal political career, the Washington Times wrote on September the 10th, 2015. Angela Merkel welcomes refugees to Germany despite rising anti-immigrant movement. The entire refugee crisis was created by Merkel as a diversion because Germany was being viewed as the harsh enforcer of loans, which was structured to hide what Goldman Sachs had instituted to get Greece into the euro from the outset. The entire reason for the refugee crisis was simply the view of Merkel globally. She needed to reshape her image from the loan shark to the caring Mother Merkel. Europe is now paying the price because Merkel was simply concerned about her polls. And you can see that she has gone from a high in 2015 of 0.75 to now in 2020 0.05. One little point I want to raise here is because all of this is happening against a backdrop, especially in France, not so much in the rest of Europe, but certainly in France. They brought in thousands of North Africans as a source of cheap labour within the country. And they never intended to integrate them into the society. They put them in large estates which became ghettoized. These people were meant to do the low-paying and dirty jobs that the French citizens didn't want to do. And over the years, this whole situation has brewed and festered, and we now have generations, literally generations of these people who are still virtually in limbo. Some of them have got French citizenship, but many still have not. And so France, in many ways, is the author of its own misfortune. It should have treated these immigrant workers, these migrant workers, much more fairly, in a much more open-handed fashion, and so I'm really having a lot of difficulty feeling too much sympathy for Macron's plight right now, and the plight that's going on within France. Actually, I find it kind of interesting that in today's world, how this has become passé because it's seen as something as a way of oppressing another nationality, but prior to this, you know, it wasn't spoken about because it was a dirty little secret. Either way, not speaking about this has allowed it to fester, and to continue in this vein is just going to create further problems. It's going to make it more and more difficult for people to integrate. It's going to lead to more and more clashes between the citizens of the country and the immigrants coming into the country, because they're all scared to death of each other and there's no way to resolve the problem. So we're reaching very dangerous territory here, my friends. It's like we have bottled up something and we put it on high heat. And you can see the result. We can see the result. I just find it stunning that nobody wants to acknowledge what is going on here. And as I say, until we discuss this openly, without any kind of biases, just with an honest will to solve the problem. And of course that means helping to resolve and solve some of the problems that have been caused in these countries by certainly large corporations like oil corporations going in and destroying environment and so on and so forth, manipulating governments and all of this kind of stuff. All of these things, and I'm going to do another documentary actually on that, because and it's just absolutely staggering the amount of damage that some of these corporations have done in some of these third world countries, through mining for resources and so on and so forth, factories, pollution, all kinds of huge, horrible issues, which are also causing migration, from one country to another. And you wait until we get into environmental migration, when you can no longer grow food in your country because there is just too much drought or too much water. Either is pretty bad, and you see those people start moving around. Where are they going to go to? This has to be not just a national but an international debate, and not with self-serving politicians. This has to be a debate amongst the public of the world, because we're the ones who have to live with the consequences of all of these decisions. And again, this is why you're seeing the yellow vest protests in France and erupting now all over the world, is because the inequality is now, the cracks in the system are so big, you just can't help but stumble over them. So hang on to your hats, folks. It's going to be an incredible year, I think, in 2019. Okay, well, if you've enjoyed this video and the information, please like and subscribe below, and please leave a comment. I enjoy reading as many comments as I can. I can't always reply to all of them because they're actually getting to be quite a few, but I do scroll down because there's a lot of stuff in people's comments. It really gives you an idea of what's going on out in the real world. In the meantime, this is Hound Dog Steve signing off. You take care, you have a great weekend, stay safe, stay warm, and we will talk to you very, very soon. See ya. Bye.